We're live. Welcome back. Episode number 6 of the Watching Privacy Show with Brent and Raju. And let's dive right in this week in privacy because I think there's a couple news stories we want to cover, and then we'll get into our main topic that we just kind of went over on time last week for. So first up, it doesn't seem like this Apple thing is really going away. This scanning that they're doing is just still in the news. Everybody seemed to has quite an opinion on it. One thing I found out that was new was I guess Facebook already has a partnership with CSAM and they do some stuff. But then also, I think the WhatsApp head, called out Apple on the news. There you go. Yeah. Well, on the sensational of the headline, of course, but kind of the pot calling the kettle black on that one a little bit, especially after the stuff that they've been through on the WhatsApp end. But have you guys heard anything new or picked up any new details from last week? What do you guys think?
It's almost sort of like pot, meat, kettle. I mean, it almost felt like Facebook saying, finally, we got something we could go after Apple on with this privacy stuff, and we're going for it. And then something else happened on the Facebook side. They said, oh, well, we had our moment, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But it almost feels like everybody was jumping on the bandwagon with the Apple news, and rightfully so. But it just felt like this might have been a little gratuitous when it comes to Facebook / WhatsApp and their righteous indignation around this.
And I suspect Apple did not expect such a pushback. They thought, this is simple thing and everyone will be going for it, but they underestimated its impact. That's the feeling I get. And looking through some of the news that was going on late last evening, the Slack channels within Apple going crazy with these debates on this front, and rightly so. I think Apple is likely underestimating the long-term implications of this. They are doing it, and again, as we said last time, road to hell is paved with good intentions, and there is a good intention here. But play it out a few years down the lane, because when you have a multinational company like Apple that operates in multiple countries, in each country you basically play by the law of the land. And in some cases, the law of the land may be different from where they operate today. In such cases, they'll be forced to, obey and play. Otherwise, they have to just pull back completely from that particular country. Now, that is where the financial side comes in. What if you have to pull out of a country or several countries out there? Will that impact the bottom line? And then that is a tough decision they got to make there. And it's not the impact today. How is that going to play a few years from now is what people and analysts are worried about, and rightly so.
Yeah, one thing I saw that was kind of interesting, I heard on a podcast earlier this week, I forgot what I was listening to, but someone said, I think Facebook gets something like 20 million CSAM identifications or matches that need to get reviewed a year or a month. Somehow it averaged out to something like 55,000 a day, whatever the math comes to. And that was at the Facebook scale. I would imagine, iPhones are a lot more or maybe equal in terms of content, and manually reviewing all that content is no easy job. And like you said, today it's this, which was not something like, I don't think the US government pushed it, right? Which is, if the government pushes it and then they comply, maybe they got a little bit of a cop out, like a good story. But here it's like, we're trying to do the right thing, which I don't know how prevalent this problem really is. It's a bad thing. I think we all agree, but it seems like the cost benefit ratio is kind of not really even, or even leaning in the benefit side.
I think the government did push it in this case. I've seen a tweet from someone from the government saying thanking Apple for accepting their push or some such thing out there. So yeah, there was a push from the government, no doubt.
Which is, I guess, how it starts. And obviously it makes it a little scarier, right? Because just like you were saying, like every government in every country, if it starts pushing in certain areas, it's going to get messy very quickly.
Yeah, and Facebook reports those numbers because all the data is in the cloud, and now once it is in the cloud, they are able to process it and report it. Apple, in Apple's case, majority of the data is going to be on the device, and And then if it is encrypted end to end, then they cannot do it during that process. But once in the cloud, they can do it, and that's what they're doing now. That's why the restriction saying, the iCloud photos are the ones that are going to be scanned. But remember, iCloud photos are not encrypted. It is encrypted in transit, but it is not encrypted at rest. That makes a huge difference. And I don't know if I don't know if really Apple is equipped to handle this volume. Frankly, it'll be interesting to see how they cope up. Like as you were saying, if it is 55,000, a day, then which means Apple has introduced a manual process in there in the review system. And will they have the capacity, or did they build up the capacity? Are they expecting a load to cope up with this? Those are all the things that would be interesting to see.
To me, it feels like this is all of a sudden privacy, or maybe not all of a sudden, but it's flared to such a high level now that privacy is like the new battlefield that the FANG guys are playing for supremacy around, because Apple, I think, came at this with good intentions. There's a heightened sense of what does every move now mean to data privacy. And even with good intentions, if it's not, every scenario isn't really thought out to the nth degree before you launch it, it's going to be looked at, scrutinized, particularly by your competition, to find any weak piece that they can then talk about and blow up. Because I just see this as, once again, this is already a big deal, but then Facebook seemed, or WhatsApp, or the combination of the two, seemed to really want to blow it up, because it felt like it was one of the first times that they could actually go at Apple on the privacy front and win one. It just feels like privacy might be the new battlefield that these big guys are really trying to get at each other with.
It's an interesting situation, Brent, where Apple fumbled, and Facebook is looking for that opportunity to pounce. And that's what this is, whether a WhatsApp person attacking Apple, all of that. So that's what's going on. Google is an interesting situation where they're a platform provider, where they compete with Apple, where they have to respect privacy on one side to even be on par with Apple to for the Android and Pixel adoption. On the other hand, they are also the ad platform out there, one of the duopolies. So they have to maintain that balance, and that is what they're trying to do. Google or Facebook doesn't have that, so they'll go after Apple on some of these cases.
Yeah, I think this story then kind of expands. There was a little bit of news about IBM too. They came out with this supposedly solving the data privacy problem, which I think is quite the headline, because it's not really what the subheader is about. But this topic of homomorphic encryption came up, I think last week or the week before, when we were talking about WhatsApp possibly decrypting messages on the client side and then doing it. I'm not super well versed. Honestly, I tried to go down the rabbit hole again, and I would say I either went over my head or lost interest, one of the two, very quickly. But have you guys heard of this stuff or read anything more on it?
I read about this IBM thing, and obviously it is light on details, and as is typically the case when you're trying to do something questionable, whenever you see these complex things like fully homomorphic encryption, they are basically obscuring some details underneath. To me, whenever I immediately after read this, it reminded me of QE in the financial world. QE is quantitative easing, is another word for money printing, essentially. But you basically hide that under a complex terminology that people won't even go that extra step to do some research, right? So in other words, in summary, just like quantitative easing, I see it as encryption easing. They're looking for ways to ease the encryption ways, still keep your data private, but we want to get whatever information that we will get, and it becomes a slippery slope. And when when you're not happy with some of the things like encryption, well, you pull together enough parties out there whose interests are aligned and put together a new form of encryption, sell that, market that, and see if you can get some adoption so that the ad vendors and whatnot can get whatever they want out of it. That is what it sounded like when I read it. Again, the devil's in the details. And their post was light on those details.
Well, here's the detail right here. I pulled this quote. Here's the detail. It's a unique form of encryption. Okay. It tells us a lot. And it's going to allow us to compute data that's still encrypted in an encrypted state. So there's the detail for you, Raju.
So what that reads to me is, will allow us to steal the contents of your house and still keep your house locked while it is locked. Right? That's how it sounds like.
Or we'll lock it back on the way out.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so unique.
And then I guess trucking along next was I guess Facebook is on the PR push. They had a interview with The Verge where they're rebuilding ads, and so it knows a lot less about you. And this whole thing, either from the Apple story or the Google stories or any along this, basically these guys are saying that they're building a new way to do this, but ultimately it only really benefits the top 4 or 5 players, right? Because they've already got everything. If privacy, if anything, it's in their best interest to just push privacy, say everything should be first party, lock it down, build their moat, and then it's almost virtually impossible to jump over it essentially, or build a bridge over it. But this article had a lot of interesting bits and pieces of information. Did you guys read it or see the interview?
I did. Again, it depends on your worldview on Facebook. I have zero trust on Facebook. So next week this is going to change. So I'll believe it when I see it. But again, this is not in their best interest. And of course, there are other angles that will play into it. But these days, I don't trust anything Facebook says. So your worldview could be different.
Isn't that the problem? You just can't trust, and it's based on a history, a pattern. And when you see something that says they're working to learn less about you, the first thing is, okay, what's the real deal here? I mean, what's really going on? Because when's the last time they actually did that? And their business model is built on knowing more about you. How do you calibrate those two things? It's really hard for you to take this stuff at face value coming from where they've been. So I looked at this with a raised eyebrow, and my eyebrow is still raised, folks. That's all I can say.
And remember, Brent, this comes a week after WhatsApp wanting to figure out a way to do ads through encrypted messages. And here we are a week later. So let's wait for next week. We'll see something different. And it'll go in the opposite direction.
See, this story and even the IBM story and the story before it, all of this is along the common thread of encryption not really possibly being encryption. So one of the questions that the interviewer asks is about multi-party computation, which is basically the technology they talk about in one of the blog posts the Facebook guy talks about, right? And it basically encrypts data about users that's shared between companies for ad targeting, right? And so the Facebook person goes on and says, multi-party computation is another approach to anonymous data sharing. Instead of it necessarily being aggregate, you're using encryption and cryptography technology to ensure the same end is met, where you don't learn anything about an individual. So this whole thing about encryption is basically either being a farce or people are finding ways around it, or ultimately, I think people feel safe when they say, end-to-end encrypted, like we heard with the Zoom story a couple of weeks ago. But now we're just finding out that either there's ways around encryption or people are actively working on ways to get around it. But ultimately, everyone's going to go around saying they're, encrypted and everything is safe. But then what's happening in the back end, I think that's probably the next frontier of engineering, basically, is how to dig into, quote, encrypted data. Because all three of these are going along the same thread.
When you're in the surveillance mode, no data, no amount of data is enough. You always need more. And one of the next frontiers is probably the encrypted data. And there'll be a lot of others, but I think that's the reason we are hearing more about it.
It just feels to me like a year ago, people were not at this level of thought with privacy. We talked about over the last couple of weeks encryption versus de-encryption, anonymization versus de-anonymization, de-identifying data. I actually feel better about things now because it feels like the level of not only the level of knowledge but the level of interest in this area from not just from an industry standpoint, but I think from a consumer standpoint is growing. It's good. It seems to be growing, because all of these things that have been done in the past, now there's way more scrutiny by it for every move that's being done now. I think that's a good thing. I think eventually that'll lead to these big companies having to do things that they never really wanted to do, like say things like we're going to get less information about you. Could you imagine that being said a year ago? Absolutely not. So I think, as we go through these things and as they kind of bubble up, it's a net good, because eventually enough talk and enough action by consumers is going to force some of these guys to do things differently than they've ever thought they would do before.
And the discussion is good, as you rightly said, Brent. And we'll we'll really believe it when we see that in action. PR speak is one piece. How actionable is that speak is where it comes down to. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these companies act on it. But I don't trust some of these companies out there.
It's like no trust. Can you verify? If they say something, they better make sure that there's some kind of verification mechanism, because you're right. Who's going to trust this after the last several years of, all sorts of ways this data is being used, for misinformation to kind of influence weird activities? It's too hard to forget that as you listen to things like we're going to take less information from you.
Yeah. Well, I guess, there's the third bit of news, I guess, kind of along the trail of collecting the information is kind of just kids with information. So there was talks, I guess it's been on for a while, about, Instagram for kids. I think YouTube for kids has been around for quite some time, and how they differentiate basically maybe some data collection policies, ad targeting policies all around kids generally under 13. And I was looking into the Instagram for kids story, and then I got linked to a Facebook article from their own blogs about how they know someone's old enough. And it's one of those things that paved with good intentions, but in this article that they themselves write for their own company, they talk about how they do age verification, right? So generally you would assume that kids enter their own birthday when they sign up for some service, and then obviously lie about that, right? If you have to be 13 or older for it. So what they do is they basically look through, messages and wall posts and stuff like that. And so one example that they cite, if they say, happy quinceañera, happy 15th birthday, happy 12th birthday, they'll identify those messages and then can flag something as underage. And another thing that they quote say is, one area we believe that has real promise is working with operating system providers, internet browsers, and other providers so they can share information to help apps establish whether someone is of an appropriate age, right? And so appropriate age is a verification that can happen under 13 as a binary, but it can also happen to say, I'm 33 years old, so-and-so is this many years old, right? That's how the verification game kind of works, under the guise of, children's privacy protection and things along those lines. So I think kids in services is, I don't have kids, so I don't have a skin in the game, but it's definitely got to be scary for a parent out there, especially if you're not like a tech forward parent who doesn't know how to apply controls and things like that, right?
Absolutely. This entire thing, somebody has to dig into what Facebook and Google are doing to track kids. And actually, the weird thing is they're tracking kids through schools. My kids go to school, and the default account they're forced to get is a Google account. They are given a Chromebook. The Chrome is the default browser. And the discussion about parents and with the parents happens on Facebook, with the Facebook groups and whatnot. And this is official. And what did the education institute, in this case the school, sign? What agreements? What visibility do we have? all of that is unknown. So they are luring schools to basically use their software and possibly for free. And at the back end, they are likely, again, someone has to dig into it to see what's really happening, likely benefiting from all the data across the board. And the entire thing screams crazy. I'm surprised that not a lot of people really dig into this issue. And I'm not part of any of those groups because, well, I don't have a Facebook account, and I really, but somebody has to. So we had to create an account, a fake account, to basically log into and be part of that. That's the craziness going on, and that's happening at the school level. I know Google said something that they offer a few things for tracking. I would say limiting the tracking for kids and whatnot. And Microsoft
Actually, one thing, I don't think it was. They were careful with the words. The words restricts ad targeting of minors, but it doesn't restrict ad collection of minors, right? So, like, if the data is collected and then you just kind of hold it until they turn 13, and now you've got a very rich profile rather than one you'd have to build over time with an adult, it's arguably more valuable, right? You're just kind of delaying the gratification rather than instantly blasting them with ads. So, I think, like you said, devil's in the details.
And these ads are crazy. I mean, kids like games, right? So certainly, my kids use a lot of games on iPads, and there was a point where every game has ads, and tracking is gotten so crazy. One day I basically had to delete every single app and said the only apps we'll install from here on is Apple Arcade apps. None of them have ads. Everything is paid for. It's a subscription. I had to make that tough decision. They were not happy, but because of the craziness and the ads and whatnot is going on, I opened the browser on their iPad, and everything is basically a result of an ad click. And there are 20 tabs open. Everything is an ad, essentially. It came from a free app. That's the craziness going on.
Yeah. I mean, what more can you add to that? I mean, and Tejas, you need to be a lawyer, because I love how you actually read every word, because some people will kind of think, well, if that's what they said, that means they're not even collecting it at all. But there is a big difference between targeting ads and collecting data. I'm guessing they're collecting data while restricting the ad targeting.
Yeah, I can't imagine even Facebook or Google would say otherwise, that there's zero personal data collection on user accounts under 13, right? Go verify, do whatever, but an account under 13, we won't collect anything or store anything, right? You won't hear that from anybody. So I don't know. I think, I mean, I see how my parents use phones and stuff, and even my friends who have kids and things like that. If you're not like a technology person, it's a very scary world out there. I can only imagine, because I mean, nowadays the kids know technology better than the parents, obviously, right? So any kind of restrictions you do, like, chances are they'll find ways around it too. I did the same thing with my parents when I was younger, and the next generation will do the same thing. So,
and as Jeff points,
I'll put that back up.
Yeah, as Jeff points out, YouTube Kids and the kids section of YouTube itself is massive. And look at the ads there. Yeah. The ad itself feels like a game or a video. Sometimes the ads go for 30 minutes. They're 30-minute long ads, and you think they're actually watching a video, but they're actually watching an ad that is 30-minute long. And I remember my kid saying, she was repeating an ad, and then at the end she says, each sold separately. And then that is when I knew she's watching too much YouTube.
Actually, Brent, if you flick that screenshot up one more time, we didn't even talk about the second half of that title. How come I can't request to take my kids' photos down, right? Why is it only kids can request to have their photos deleted and removed? What is this like odd restriction of under 13 kids can't have their photos, but once you turn 13, it's fair game for us to do whatever we want with your pictures? It's crazy. No comment. But for sure, we're going to get into the main topic today. I don't want to derail us, because I think we can talk about this stuff for quite some time. But we'll go into our deep dive today. That was supposed to be last week's, but for this week, it's kind of all about, really, I would say we kind of took two categories, podcasts and TVs. Podcasts is the first thing I guess we'll touch on. And I don't think people really understand the podcast game and kind of where it's going. Podcasts traditionally were not very popular. I think Serial might have been the thing that made it a big deal a couple years back. And then I think the pandemic made podcasts extremely popular. Everyone and their mom made a podcast. We made a podcast, right? So I mean, it became a popular way to get a message out there, go direct to your audience, and connect with them. But podcasts were always traditionally a very open system. Everything was based on RSS feeds. You basically just subscribe to the player of your choice, and you get your pieces of information. But now there's been a big, I would say, I won't call it consolidation, but there's been a big drive by bigger platforms, specifically, I would say, probably Amazon, Spotify, and even first-party apps like NPR, Wondery, these types of, I guess Amazon bought Wondery, but regardless, NPR I know is a big one of this too. But basically, these guys are all getting into the first-party podcast game. And it's, Joe Rogan made like 100 million, for example, right? Do you think that Spotify paid Joe Rogan 100 million to have Joe Rogan on his platform? Not so much. He was already on the platform. People could already listen to Joe Rogan shows on Spotify if they wanted to, but they wanted to exclusively get those 10 million, 11 million, 20 million, however many subscribers that he has to get on him, get Spotify accounts, provide their information, take all their listening history and things along those lines, and monetize that. Think about that. You've picked up 11 million essentially users that are you now have data on, right? I mean, sorry, we're flipping through slides because I'm kind of going on a rant here, but one of them was about Spotify revenue, the 600% something caught my eye. But yeah, broadly speaking, podcasts, there's a lot of collection and a lot of data that's being used on podcasts that people don't realize. And the point of the rant was really about ads, because everybody realizes podcasts have ads. And I don't think people realize how those ads are generated and why they get the ads that they get. Generally, there's a couple different types of ads in a podcast. You'll have the ones, that are static, which means the host is baked into the audio and it's directly part of it. And, generally the podcast host has a relationship with the advertiser and they work out a deal and they just say it as a part of this. Like, you know what, go check out soandso.com. They make this great product. But what a lot of people don't realize is what you might think is a natural ad might actually be a dynamic ad where the podcast host has recorded maybe 100 different advertisements. And then through some system of bidding and auctioning and just like how ads show up on Google or whatever, they'll dynamically insert certain ads in your podcast listening. And I go back to the Joe Rogan thing as well, because Joe Rogan went to Spotify and I'm a Spotify premium subscriber and I get ads at the beginning of the podcast, in the middle of the podcast, which makes absolutely no sense because I'm a paying Spotify subscriber and they don't even care. And people complain, but Spotify doesn't care because people will still listen or, still have their Spotify subscription. So I'll wrap up that rant with just what are your thoughts on the podcast game in general and what you have seen from the news and things along those lines.
I'm just going to put this up. This is why there's so much emphasis on podcasts and advertising and insertion and all the things that Tejas had talked about. Look at the damn growth. I mean, this thing it's meteoric. And like you said, Amazon is starting a podcast network. Spotify has got theirs. I mean, almost everybody, there's a video live stream. There's social or drop-in audio. There's podcasts. And what is it all? It's not only content, it's attention. This is why these platforms are spending all this money and giving this ungodly amount of money to Joe Rogan, because he has a huge audience and he can keep their attention. And when you got attention, you can convert that attention into what? Ads and sales. And so this is why, when you hear things like we're going to collect less data on you, how is that really possible when all this money is at stake? Because attention drives everything. It drives these deals. And so podcasts have had this meteoric kind of rebirth because people are all into them. And then, Substack has bought a podcast network. It's all content. It's all about attention and all about how to monetize that attention through buying data, through encrypting data, through less use of collection of data. Yeah, it all does not add up when you see numbers like this.
The sad thing, it goes back to one of the points we discussed early on in one of those early episodes, right? How much brain power, PhDs to whatnot, thousands of smart people are trying to figure out how to insert ad into something. you know I say, what a waste of resources. And I see this entire generation, the last 10 years or so, as a significant waste of smart people's resources, because we are heading down this path of how to run ads and how to make someone watch an ad or a click on ad. Significant waste of resources. Yeah, it's actually sad.
It pays a lot though.
Wow.
There-
That's how they keep you, right?
I mean, I'm just popping up these talking points here. Ad revenue for podcasts increased more than 40% last year and is projected to top 800 million. The whole privacy game is this trying to find the right mix of privacy and ad revenue potential that will keep the general population not happy, not mad, but okay with what's going on. And that's because when you hear about all these kind of things, the nods to privacy, it's nods to privacy with the caveat of we still got to make money on ads. And if people are honest about it, that's okay. But when you try to sound like you're doing this all in the name of customer data privacy, it causes us to react and say, well, really? Are you sure about that? I think if they would be more honest and open about, yeah, it's good for us, and we're going to try to restrict privacy as much as we can while still making a buck. I don't know. I think people would at least feel that's a fair assessment of what we're getting into with this stuff.
Yeah, people just don't know, I guess, what they're giving up. I mean, in the podcast world, essentially, you would basically upload a file, and then people would just subscribe to that feed, and those files, audio files, would get downloaded to your phone or a computer or whatever, right? But when you make that download, and now there's all these podcast hosting platforms that do hosting, but then at the same time do advertising, basically it tracks your IP address of where you're downloading it from. That means they have your location. They can get time of day, the device, previous downloads from that same IP, collect that and associate it with other anonymized or de-identified data from other sources, and they know exactly what you're doing. And then that's where those ads end up being more valuable. So something that I guess ultimately the point is really like, you think a podcast is a very simple thing and there's no data you're really giving up, and it's just what it is. But it is kind of scary because you have no idea what's happening in the background. And the reason these bigger players are getting involved in it is because you want to control that distribution and collect more data points and connect it to more data points, right? That's the Google game. That's the Spotify game. That's the Amazon game. I guess we can only bet that Facebook gets into some audio type of situation or podcast as well, too, right? There's no reason to leave that money on the line. It'll be a part of the metaverse.
Yeah. By the way, Esteban makes a very, very good point here. He talks about people will just simply ignore it. I mean, that happens. I know that happens to me subconsciously, where when I'm reading an article, all the ads that are around it, are kind of fading out. I mean, of course, I prefer the reader mode in Safari, but you automatically tune out with all of these, and that's what I do when I watch something. Whenever there is an ad that is playing on TV, that's when I hit the mute button. So I always have the TV remote with me, because only after the ad is done I unmute it, and people will figure that out and it'll tune out, and the conversion ratio will significantly drop down. That's what when you're bombarded with a lot of ads.
I mean, I'm sure there was stuff a while ago about the effectiveness of ads. I think Facebook's last report was like inventory went up 6%, but ad revenue went up like something like 40%. And there's a lot of debate about just the effectiveness of these ads, because if you're getting ads inserted in so many different ways and you're spending so much money on them, at a certain point, people do just like what Raju said. I do the same thing. I think a lot of people, not even privacy conscious people, just people who are annoyed with ads, do the same thing, right? Block through everything and skip it. And, whoever that advertiser is spent $10, $20, $30 for that impression. And it was completely useless, right?
Yep.
Hey, Tejas?
Yeah.
What about TV? As
What
I
about
set
TV?
you up to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, what Roger talks about when it comes to TV ads, I guess people don't really realize what's going on with TV ads. So, what do you call it? There is everybody has smart TVs nowadays. It's virtually impossible to buy a TV um, that's not connected to the internet or doesn't have some smart capabilities. And if you do, they're generally pretty expensive or pretty terrible quality. And all of these TVs, the first thing usually during setup, you connect it to the Wi-Fi, do an update, or download your apps, and you'll get like either the YouTube app or you'll get your YouTube TV or Sling TV or any of these streaming services installed on your TV. And now that your TV is connected to the internet, you might get ads through those apps themselves, but that's separate from what the TV manufacturer is collecting about you. And when I went down this rabbit hole of what TVs collect on you, it was the scariest thing I think I've ever seen, because there is this technology called active or automatic, one of the two, ACR, active content recognition. And Vizio got busted for this a while ago. Samsung's big in the game. Sony's big in the game. LG is big in the game. Every major TV provider you can think of. And what active content recognition basically does is every interval, maybe 1 second, 30 seconds, whatever, it'll take a clip of your TV, a screenshot essentially, beam it up to their servers, match that screenshot with the time, location of where you are so they know what you're watching, and then associate that with a TV show, a user profile connected to other data sources, and they can target you with an advertisement within 30 seconds of the content being displayed on the screen. So that means if you're watching YouTube TV, basically YouTube TV knows exactly, or let's not use YouTube because that's a Google thing and too easy of an example. Let's use like Sling TV. Sling, the TV itself will track what you're watching, know exactly who you are, and then those commercials you see during your break are not like some blanket commercial that everybody in the US or everyone in your region is seeing. Those are custom tailored to you based on data that they've collected about you. And connecting your TV, if there's one thing I would tell people that to protect your privacy is, for the love of God, you have to go into your home, go into your TV settings, do a factory reset, and never connect your TV to the internet. Like that is the easiest thing to do to kind of try to protect yourself a little bit. But then the fear of unplugging your TV is what Brent just put up right here. A lot of the streaming services or sticks or media players that you connect to your TV, those are ad devices in themselves. So Roku is not a company that makes media players or streaming set-top boxes. They're an advertising company that happens to make hardware. It's not a hardware company that happens to do advertising. Same thing with your Amazon Fire Stick. You're going into the Amazon ad system. You get a Chromecast TV, you're in the Google ad system. I guess Apple TV is the only other one that kind of does some semi-tracking, but yeah, like there's no safe place in streaming content because everything is tracked, and every one of those devices is essentially made from some sort of ad platform, because that's how they make money. These numbers are wild, Brent. Like, I mean, this was just the craziest thing I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah,
it's
crazy.
Really at the beginning, isn't it? I mean, they're just digging into the numbers here, because go back to this guy here. It says 2 significant steps in advancements TV happened Monday. That was March 1st. That wasn't all that long ago. What's going to be the advancements going forward about how they're able to capture devices? And you got devices in your in your car, and you got devices in your house, and they have screens, and they're anytime they're on and people are watching them, data is being collected.
Yeah. So I mean, can't reiterate the point they just made enough. Do not connect your TV directly to the network, because the first thing they do is obviously download whatever they want to download from the network. The number two, they are also scanning all the devices that you have in your house, and all that information goes in there. They know how many Apple devices or Samsung devices, how many other TVs you have, and every single piece of information is being streamed, just like they're scanning local networks, right? That's what all these other systems do, like your smartphone, your or your other so-called smart devices or smart assistants. They scan all these things and ship it out. That's additional data point. And then on top of it, the point they just mentioned is about scanning the content. I think there was one of those cases where maybe it was Samsung or some other thing is taking the screenshots of some of the content that you're watching and then sending it back into their servers, and they're processing it, and then based on the content, analyzing the content, they're pushing an ad to you. Those are all scary stuff. I mean, that is on the consumer side. Now imagine on the business side of things. People have TVs deployed now in conference rooms and whatnot, and they may or may not even realize that these are not these are connected to the network, and they may not be as secure as they think they are. I mean, I had to call some of the people I know to basically disconnect the TVs from the internet in a business, so that there's no leak there. But all of this is a very scary topic, and that has to be addressed.
I remember, Raju, when we had the office back on 35 a couple years ago, we got these Vizio TVs for the conference room. And back then, Vizio TVs for a couple years, 2017-ish, probably when that lawsuit happened, they didn't come with remotes. And so you had to use the app, which means you had to connect the TV to the internet in order to even control the TV. There was like buttons physically on the TV, but there was no like remote, which was just mind blowing at the time. And it seemed like it made sense. And, oh, just use your phone. It's great. But then you realize this is why. And Jeffrey brought up how Vizio was caught listening in on people. And that was back in 2017. And in that article that Brent put up there for a quick second, one of the lines from it says, Vizio captured as many as 100 billion data points every single day from millions of TVs. So billions of data points daily from millions of TVs. And that's in 2017, when you can only imagine the growth and the expansion of connected TVs nowadays. So that's quite a number. I mean, each one of these on the screen here shows how many devices that they're talking to and partnerships they have for their ad networks, right?
Yeah, can I just mention, what the hell is Alfonso? I don't even know what Alfonso is. And they got 15 million opted in U.S. smart TV households. There's names that I'm not familiar with, and they're collecting all sorts of stuff. I might have some kind of device or TV that has this running in the background. I have no idea at this point what's going on with all this.
And another point that Jeff mentioned, like he was talking about Nielsen, paying $10 for, that's a rabbit hole in itself. It'll be good to ask the question: how does Nielsen get all this data? Who are all the vendors and sources that is sending the data to Nielsen and whatnot? That is all the data brokers, and it is a data racket in itself.
I mean, if they can afford to pay you $10 a month, think about what they're making, right?
And think about Nielsen. They are totally addicted. Their business is from the beginning is all about this data. Now it's getting easier and easier to collect it for them. That's pretty much their game.
Yeah. In my case, I basically, I don't use any third party thing except Apple. I mean, I don't connect my TV directly, just Apple TV, and of course, I don't enable the Siri to whatnot. That is where not connecting is the best solution in this case, unless you use it. I know Brett probably has 15 Alexa devices running in his room.
I was getting ready to say, I've been doing all this harsh talking on, and I just watched like Netflix last night. We're streaming on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, as I always like to say. But it's like, for me, just be upfront with me and let me make the decision whether I'm cool with you knowing certain things, because I'm also cool with getting the things that you're offering. But a lot of this is still done under, behind doors, under the table. And to me, that's the biggest negative. Just let us know what you're doing. Now, if you feel like you're doing something underhanded or think something that people aren't going to buy, guess what? They probably won't. But if you know how to, position or message correctly, you might be surprised at how much you still might get. And then you don't have to feel like you're, doing a covert op just to get what you want. But I think that's the hardest part of this whole thing is, you guys, I mean, these companies, you got to just be honest. and make a good case for why you want what you want.
And that goes back to the first story we discussed about, Brent, which is the Apple story. One of the reasons people were mad is, they did not sign up for this, right? Where they were
Right.
scanning a few things. Did you inform this while I bought the device and whatnot? This is also the default opt-in is the issue, right? So that is the issue with AirTags. You're opted in. You don't even have an option to opt out of that network. So the same thing, there's no opt-out of Apple scanning all these devices, and Facebook is probably screaming there saying, why do you want to provide that option to my apps and is not available at the platform level? And that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues is also people have gotten comfortable with kind of like the advertising subsidized cost structure of certain things. Like you can get a Roku 4K streaming stick for like $30 or something like that, right? And the reason you get it is because they sell that hardware at a loss because they're going to make the money on the back end, right? Now, if you went and told people now that streaming stick is going to be $100, $150 or something like that, they might not be too happy, and they might argue, you're pricing people out of a market or not giving them, I don't know, some fundamental right or something along those lines. But even if you offered like two separate versions and says, give me like a lockdown version and give me a non-lockdown version or something along those lines, right? The Roku story is just wild because their business has been booming, and you have to go through like all sorts of hoops in order to turn off like the enhanced TV experience, I think is what they call it, right? So that's that honesty aspect. Like, just tell me what you're doing. You're collecting everything about me, and in exchange, I'm giving you a cheap device, right? Just be straight. Yeah. And that's all you really need to do. And I think you would earn a lot more goodwill with people, because I still think there's plenty of people who would take that trade because they see the value in it, and some people that won't. And you kind of make everybody happy, and both sides will end up trusting you, right? At least you're honest about what's going on.
Yeah, and two different paid models: pay with your data or pay with money. Pick one. And these are strictly different.
But I mean, that could go down the rabbit hole of like privacy being, for the wealthy and not so much for developing countries or lower income people. It's kind of a scary precedent to set in that regard as well, right?
Well, at least YouTube says you have YouTube Premium, which I pay for, which is ad free. But as Tejas would point out, that does not necessarily mean they're not collecting data. But at least I don't have to be bothered with the ads. And for me, that's worth the trade-off.
For now.
And that's good for me. For now.
Yeah, I mean, but as Tejas has pointed out, if Spotify is able to show ads in the podcast while he's paying for a subscription, well, certainly Spotify is leading the way and showing the path for YouTube.
Well, YouTube has already done that, because if you notice, I watch a lot of these creator folks. They give a lot of content, but if you notice, in the middle of their videos, they have outside sponsors. They're not advertisers, they're sponsors. And they basically run an ad or a commercial / testimonial right in their video, which has nothing to do with the YouTube ad network stuff.
Those make more money, right? You get 100% of that revenue versus splitting it with Google if you rely on their ads, right? And you control that relationship rather than YouTube owning it. I guess we're kind of running short on time here, so we'll wrap it up. But one thing we definitely got to put in the show notes is Consumer Reports has a really good article that has a list of basically how to opt out of active content recognition for TVs on a majority of TV platforms like Sony, LG, Vizio, whatever. It's a little bit of a painstaking process for each TV, but we'll be sure to throw that up there or in the notes somewhere at some point, or add a comment or find a way to get it out there. If you Google or DuckDuckGo preferably, Consumer Reports, how to turn off TV snooping, you should be able to figure it out and find the link. But yeah, podcasts are scary. TV's even scarier. The world is scary, and all you can really do. The last thing I'll mention, Jeffrey mentioned he uses a 30 version of the Roku. The real way to really stick it to people like Roku is you buy the Roku, get the subsidized device, but then get like a Pi hole or something to block all the data out of it. So they're not getting any residual value out of it, and I'm getting the device for cheap. And that's why kind of a lot of these tech tinkerers will go and like flash Android devices or install like custom OSs and things like that, because you're going to take the cheap device, but we'll turn off the data funnel on our own from a network perspective. But then again, if you're technical, you can figure that stuff out. But yeah, great show. Thanks for talking. Tune in next week. same time,
Yeah.
10 a.m.
And thanks
Central,
to
11 a.m.
everybody.
Eastern.
Yeah, thanks to everybody, all the comments, so many that I couldn't even put them all up. So that was great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, cool. Adios.